Good morning, this is James Dempsey coming to you live from the JD Lightning Ranch. I'm sitting out here on the back of the blade for the tractor, and I just want to share a little vision for what this podcast is going to be about, or YouTube channel, whatever, however I can post to get the message out there. But my intent is to begin to preach the gospel of the kingdom, because I feel the gospel of the kingdom has not fully been preached, and in fact, I feel that it probably hasn't even been fully understood by many. Yeah, I think the gospel of salvation has pretty much gone throughout the world, although there probably are areas that have not been touched by that. But the gospel of the kingdom is God's plan to bring us into his millennial reign. And that's basically expanding his kingdom and learning his voice and knowing the Father. And I will get into some teaching videos at times. I'll call some of those will be called book reports. So basically give you a synopsis of what I've studied in some of these areas, and some in-depth Bible studies we'll get into. I've got a couple studies I've fairly well completed. One of them I call Living Your Life Out of the Kingdom. So basically it's a study where I dig into, what Jesus said about the kingdom is among you. It's within you. So it's Christ in you that's the hope of glory. So, and then I've put together another Bible study on the resurrection. I'll get into, the first resurrection and second resurrection, and give a background teaching of some of what was taught back when Jesus walked the earth, and what he and Martha even talked about. I dig into that a little bit, but those are probably a couple of the more in-depth studies I will do here in the future. I'm going to try not to ever waste your time, because our time is precious, and I don't want to be taking up hours of anyone's day, unless, there comes a time where we do some longer videos with some meetings that may occur, or this or that. But I just want to give a little synopsis here of some of the vision for what I want to do on this podcast. We'll be posting on YouTube and maybe some other social media. But today I'm working on a project to build us a firewood box. So I'm going to have some how-to videos in here. You're going to get to know me, because I'm going to be open and candid and share with you a lot of my walk, my testimony. So really, I'll share a little of that with you right now, actually, because at an early age, I was probably about 15, was the first time I could actually say I heard the voice of God, which I didn't know it was the voice of God at that time. But I grew up in a family. We went to a Disciples of Christ church, fairly traditional, non-denominational, they called themselves. They're still around today. But this was an Easter Sunday. We didn't go to church very often, because my dad was involved in, we were doing a house addition project at the house, and that went on for probably many years, from the time I was maybe 12 or 13 until, I was probably 15 or 16. And he took on this huge project. And this is really where I began to learn a lot of things about construction and plumbing and that type of thing. So I developed some good skills with all of that. But so that's where I'll get into with some of these how-to videos too, because we need to learn a lot to bring forth this kingdom, because God is going to fill the earth with his people, and he's going to rule and reign here on earth as it is in heaven. It's like how he taught us to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So it's learning to know him and do his will. And when we're doing his will, we're really living our real true life, because that's where the real fulfillment comes from, is when you're doing what he wants you to do and what he's called you to do. That's really your call and purpose. It's hidden in Christ. And so we will try to teach this as we go along. Let's see, I had a train of thought I was kind of losing here a little bit, but I'm a little dyslexic, you guys, so sometimes I can bounce all over, and I want you to see some of my faults too, because none of us are perfect. I can't say I know everything, but I'll tell you, over the last 4 years, really, I have gotten more revelation on the kingdom of God and his will for my life. Really, that's where I got sidetracked, because I was talking about the first time I heard the voice of the Lord, and it was an Easter Sunday, and we were at church, and it was right at the end of the service. And in this church, they never really would, they wouldn't do a altar call. But this one occasion on Palm Sunday, I don't know if it was just because it was Palm Sunday, but they did this invitational hymn at the end. And I was sitting there, my dad was sitting on my left, and an old retired minister who had been a Disciples of Christ pastor, he was probably about 80 years old. And he was sitting right next to the aisle, between me and the aisle. And they were singing this song, and I think it was Just As I Am, actually. And I was sitting there, and I just contemplated in my heart. I was like, what is this all about? And then all of a sudden, I hear, this is when you confess me before men. And my heart started beating rapidly. And I just knew I had to get up and go. And I asked the old retired minister sitting next to me to excuse me, and I could just see him smile and a big tear come into his eye. And I walked down that aisle and went up. I think it might have just been me, or there might have been one other person that went forward. And the pastor asked me if I believed that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of the living God, and died for my sins. And I said, yes, I do. And then I remember after the service, I was like, I want to get baptized. And I told the pastor that I want to get baptized. And it's interesting that in this particular church, this denomination, they only baptized once a year on Easter Sunday. And all the kids, you're supposed to go to a class. But, I was too old. I mean, I was older than they normally take people through. I had missed that class because, we weren't going to church that much. But he explained to me, well, we usually have you go through a class and make sure you fully understand, what you're doing and what this commitment is and understand baptism. And I was like, I don't care about the class. I just want to get baptized. I think it was just the Lord, the Lord at work within me back then is like, you're giving your life to me. But I still didn't fully understand that. So the pastor had said, well, I'll tell you what, have your mom bring you by my office sometime this week, and we'll have a little conversation, and we'll see if we can go ahead and baptize you next week, because we baptize on Easter Sunday. And my mom brought me by, and we had a conversation. I can't tell you I really remember anything about what the conversation was, but I must have convinced him some way or another. But he agreed to baptize me, and I think there was 2 or 3 others that got baptized that week on Easter Sunday. And, there wasn't, I didn't really get any more teaching to go along with that until, so I didn't really have a real dramatic life change, so to speak. I kind of carried on, but God had his hand on me, and I had heard the voice of the Lord. Even though I didn't know it. I really didn't know that was the voice of the Lord until many years later, probably maybe 10 years after that, or, that I actually realized it. But the next phase of my my testimony was I had an 8th grade science teacher that started having some little Bible studies, and he was going to a Baptist church. And he had some of us students over to his house. He took a special interest in some of us. Anybody that was open enough to, want to come and have a little Bible study with him. So he had us over at his kitchen table and started doing some. And, he basically went through the foundational doctrines of salvation and, the redemptive work that Jesus did on the cross. It's that message of salvation, the gospel of salvation. So, I got a good comprehension of that and had some little bit more life change, maybe a little deeper commitment than I did before. But yeah, this 8th grade science teacher, in fact, I still keep in touch with him. We still are. I kind of consider him like my spiritual father, because when I was growing up, I had dyslexia, and really I really struggled with reading, writing, and spelling. I was horrible, and still am for the most part. If it wasn't for Siri, sometimes I wouldn't spell anything right. But, I actually, from the time I was in, from kindergarten up, I struggled with all that. And it was because I had dyslexia. And I really didn't get diagnosed until I was in high school. Struggled with reading, writing, that whole time. I mean, my dad even sent me to special reading programs on the side in a summer school, where you read from the little, it was like a slide projector thing, and it would flash the words across and try to train your eyes to follow. And I still never got very good at that. It wasn't really until I had really decided to study the Bible, probably at the age of 18 to 20, did I really learn how to read sufficiently. And that's kind of something to confess. I know there's a lot of people nowadays that haven't had the proper training and, to become literate like we should be in this modern age. I mean, I hear now even that there's people graduating high school that really are somewhat illiterate. And it could have to do with learning disabilities, with dyslexia. There's a lot of autism nowadays. But I'm here to try to help anybody that I can along the way, and for people to be able to learn from my mistakes, because I'm going to be 64 coming up here in June. I look at my life as having like 3 different periods of 20 years to this point right now, because I look at the first phase of my life, which at 15 I did confess the Lord Jesus as my Savior and got baptized, but there wasn't a huge amount of growth. The part I kind of left out previous in that story was, I didn't really have a life change. I got a few teachings, went to the Baptist church for a little while until we all sort of found some interesting girls our age. It was a group of us, probably, I think it was 4 of us that went, and we all kind of started dating some of these girls, and got a little sidetracked from the spiritual aspect of what we were there to do. And, they were sidetracked too. But anyways, so I just kind of went on and, kind of got into the partying scene with my buddies. Grew up in a fairly rough part of Tucson on the south side, which is, I was probably pretty much a minority in our school. It's primarily Hispanic back then. Although there was, I'd say 1/3 white, maybe, in the school I grew up in. And, but yeah, we got in the partying scene, smoking pot, drinking beer, all of that. And then while I was in high school, I got a job at St. Mary's in the kitchen at the hospital, and did a part-time job. The main reason I was working is to be able to afford marijuana, I wanted to have my bag of pot. But, I did pretty well at that. And then when I graduated high school, I decided to go to Pima College, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do yet for a career path. And when I did that, I had transferred to housekeeping for a more full-time job. So I would go to school in the mornings and work in the afternoons on a 3 to 11 shift in housekeeping. And shortly after, it wasn't very long, a position came up in surgery. And I applied for that job, and I was like probably the youngest applicant for the job. But the supervisor interviewed all of us, and I look back at it and I just think it was God's hand on me, because there's probably somebody that was more qualified, more experienced, that could have gotten that job. But somehow I convinced him that I was his candidate. And I think that was just God's grace in my life at that point, which, once again, not recognizing it. I think a lot of God's hand in our life, sometimes we just don't recognize it. But so I got into surgery, and in those days, they don't do it that way now, but they had like a car wash sprayer with a special detergent that we would literally spray down the walls and the floors and wash everything down, wipe everything down, suction up everything with a wet vac, and terminally clean the OR room. So that's what I was doing, cleaning OR rooms, and come in between surgeries and clean up, the blood that was on the floor and that type of thing. But when I got in there, I was, each of the OR window had, all the ORs had a window by the scrub sink. so you could look into the OR while they were doing surgery. And I was just fascinated with it. I was like asking, hey, what's that job? Who's the person that's passing the instruments to the doctor? Oh, that's a scrub tech. Wow, what does it take to become a scrub tech? It's like, well, there's a new class starting up pretty soon at Arizona College, and it's a 9-month program. You got 6 months of classroom and then 3 months of clinical training, and you can become a scrub tech. I'm like, wow, that's awesome. So I had barely just finished up like my first semester at Pima College in Tucson, and transferred over to Arizona College, and within about a month or two, or I think it coincided pretty much with the break from the first semester at Pima College, and just got straight into the scrub tech program. So that was a lot of work, because I went to class every day and then worked that 3 to 11 shift. And then once the clinical started, I was able to transfer out of housekeeping into become a surgery orderly at that point, because they knew I was training to be a scrub tech, and accepted me as an orderly. So I would do the clinicals from 7 to 3, and then just be the orderly from 3 to 11. And it was intense. I mean, basically 16 hours a day, working and going to school and training to be a scrub tech. And I really got to have some very good mentors learning the trade, because there was some really good military trained scrub techs that I got to work under, and really learned the basics. And I really took a liking to orthopedics, with the hammers, the chisels, the saws, the screws and plates and prostheses and all of that. So I really took an interest in it. I wrote my main paper, a couple papers I had to do during the class. One of them I did on ACL reconstruction. The other one I did on total hip replacement. And so I've basically been in the OR now for 40 years. I was the youngest scrub tech. There wasn't anybody in the OR that came along for about probably 5 years. I had been a scrub tech before anybody came in that was my same age. I was like the youngest scrub tech at St. Mary's Hospital. And then it wasn't until a nurse had graduated the program and came straight to the OR that anybody was actually my age, or younger than me. So I used to train those scrub tech students too. I figured I probably did about trained over 100 scrub techs while I was scrubbing there. I scrubbed for 10 years with as a scrub tech, and then that was about the time that God began to recall me for my next awakening, which sort of happened because, like I had said, I was still in the party scene at that point. I was still, after work, we'd smoke marijuana, we would drink this and that, but was always functioning and ready to get up and go to work, because I really did love my job. Being a scrub tech is the funnest job in the OR, in my opinion. But the thing is, I'm going to go in and tell you about my experience of really coming back to God at that point, because I had a couple roommates, and we had rented this house, and it was kind of like the party scene house. We at one point had this Hawaiian luau. We dug a pit in the backyard, built a huge bonfire, wrapped an entire pig in aluminum foil, put fruit and vegetable or fruit and wine and all that, and wrapped it all up in miles of aluminum foil, dropped it in the pit, buried it in coals, and had the party the next day, and dug it up, but that's the kind of stuff we did. We had like so many people that came. It was unbelievable. But that pig really, the entire pig got eaten in probably about 30 minutes with as many people that showed up to that crazy party. But anyways, that was my past, guys. And it was all part of, where God had to take me, because I have an addictive personality. So it's easy for me to, become addicted or obsessed, so I was really into the pot back then, and drinking not as huge, but anyways, I'll get into the drinking part later in another phase of my life, but as I continue my testimony. But I wanted to share with you what had happened. These couple buddies of mine that were living at the house got this opportunity to go to Kansas and help to harvest marijuana production that was in this vineyard. They had planted all these marijuana plants amongst the grapevines to kind of hide them, and they went down there and helped them harvest that, and then brought back a trunk load, of the car full of marijuana, and they started selling it, and started buying cocaine. And actually, when they had gone away to harvest, they we closed out the lease on the home, and I had actually moved back to my mom's house at that point, and was living in the basement that my dad had built. I had talked them into letting me section off a room in the basement, and that was my bedroom, and I had my own access from the garage down the steps into the basement, and so that's where I was staying at that point. And I remember my buddy calling me up. I was down in the basement, and he calls me up and says, "Man, James, pray for me. Billy and I shot some cocaine, and I'm on the way to the hospital. My heart is about to beat out of my chest. Pray that I don't die." And I'm like, wow, how do I do that? And I said to myself, well, I'm in no condition to pray for him. He had given me like this big old, kind of like I had an ice chest down there, and it was full of marijuana, and I was still doing my same old partying scene. I hadn't gotten into the coke and all that like they did, but I was like, I gotta pray for Travis. So what did I do? I mean, the natural thing is get your life right, So I repented. I cried out to God with all of my heart. And that's what it takes, guys. You gotta cry out from the depths of your soul. You cry out to God and ask him to forgive you, to cleanse you from all unrighteousness. And you turn from the way you're going to him and give your life to him and turn to him. And I prayed for Travis, and I kind of got this, it was almost like a twisted revelation. Like, if Travis died, he would have died so you could have drugs. And I was like, wow. But God spared his life. And I got my life back on track. And I carried on that way. I went into some times where I started getting vision for my life, you know. God started taking me through, you know, I was really spending time alone in prayer and reading the Word. And that was a great thing for me to do. And I started getting some little visions in the spirit, you know. And God showed me, I'm trying to think of maybe what the order of some of this is, but there's, you know, 3 or 4 different instances that occurred. I'll start with the Jeremiah one. It may have been first or it may not have, but anyways, he told me at that time he would raise me up to be a prophet as unto Jeremiah. I had no clue what that meant, and I still didn't. And just starting to realize it a little bit more now. And what is it? It's about more than 40 years later, 45 years later. I'm really starting to understand that. And he showed me a vision of myself preaching in these different churches. And he showed me preaching unity in the body of Christ, you know, basically out of Ephesians chapter 4, where, you know, there's one faith, one Lord, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and in all, you know. And so Christ is the head of the church, and we are all members together. So I don't know if I quoted that perfect. It doesn't matter for right now. We will get into some of this kind of stuff. But we are in a journey here, you guys. And I hope you will decide to come along and join me, because we're going to become that glorious church without spot or wrinkle. But we've got to submit ourselves to the process and go through where he's taking you, you know, and try to be faithful with what he's telling you to do. We have not because we ask not. And he is faithful. So at that point, he had also showed me during that time period, you know, he showed me the future, which is me, you know, I'm starting that second phase he had showed me, you know, now. Really, you know, it happened 4 years ago, but I don't really want to get into that part today, but I'm going to try to finish up this early phase when I was 20 or whenever, around that time frame. You know, I'm going to say between, 20 and 24, who knows, something around in there. But I kind of started getting this, you know, vision from him, kind of in imagining, you know, what he was leading me to do. And I got this vision to stop, you know, quit the hospital as a scrub tech and put myself out there to be a freelance scrub tech, you know, not particularly work for any one doctor, but if somebody needed help in the OR and wanted my skills and abilities, then they could hire me. And I basically, you know, put out there, it was more than double my salary at the hospital, and launched a business. I had a friend who helped me with the bookkeeping part and the billing, and he helped me get that started, and it was successful, guys. I mean, there was times where I brought home about the same as I did from the hospital, but then I was working less than half the time, and it just went up from there. It after a year, I was pretty much, you know, doubling what I did at the hospital, and was starting to get at the point where, you know, I could need some help, and, you know, toyed with the idea of hiring somebody else to branch out the business. And I got an opportunity to be a well, that's my dyslexia, because part of the vision that God showed me at that time was that I would provide instruments in surgery. And I didn't understand that part at that point. But now it's perfectly clear, because an opportunity came along, and it was a fairly small orthopedic company that came to me. It was called the Johnson & Johnson Orthopedics. They had just branched out with a J&J branch to have an orthopedic line, and I had a total knee to sell, and it was just a cruciate retaining total knee. It wasn't a full-blown total knee that you could do revisions with or anything like that. And then I had orthozorb pins, some pins that would absorb, and that's how I got started in sales. And then the part of the vision that God had given me, where I provide instruments in the OR, started to take place, because we would bring in the instruments that they were going to use for the surgery, drop them off, and use them and pick them up and take them to the next hospital. But so I actually had turned that offer down the first time, because I still wanted to continue to build my business. And then a year later, so after being a freelance scrub tech for 2 years, that's when I had totally maxed it out. I was having to turn down a lot of jobs people wanted, and I didn't like that. And I figured, well, if you're selling a product, you don't always have to be there, and you could continue to grow. But, it turned out that the orthopedic business is a very service-oriented, demanding business. But that's how the aspect of the instruments came into play. So I basically have done that now for over 5 years, maybe, in orthopedic sales. Been in the OR 40 to 45 years now. So it's really been an interesting pathway. So I spent like 20 years in organized church. This is a whole nother story where I'll end up sharing this phase. Maybe this will go in a different broadcast. I think I'll leave it off here and share with you that aspect of my organized church and the process I went through from coming out of studying on my own, seeking God on my own, and moving into the organized church. And that's going to be a whole nother story. It's going to get wild and interesting. All right, love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.